Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Habari za leo.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the Africa Center for Cities, Our Future Cities,
Surge Africa and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center,
we are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2023 Action Festival.
Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers
to inspire action for sustainable cities.
This is the third edition of our virtual festival.
It brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent.
This year's theme is The Cities We Want.
the cities we want.
the cities we want.
The cities we want.
This mirrors the African Union 2063 Agenda vision, the Africa we want.
It is a wonderful Pan-African call for transformative change.
However, the agenda does not adequately embrace urbanization as a potential positive force for improving prosperity, inclusivity, and environmental well-being on the continent.
We need more emphasis on the role of cities and local action. And this festival aims to provide inputs into this agenda.
The cities we have are
Expanding,
incomplete,
inventive,
contested.
facing impending crisis, yet brimming with potential.
The cities we want are
people-centered,
Safe and healthy.
beacons of culture,
unflinchingly modern.
And adapting to change and leading global innovation.
We'll make these cities through
Experimenting,
learning
collaborating,
and amplifying the everyday actions of people who are shaping their cities.
The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing,
It invites you to forge new partnerships,
Experiment with new concepts and ideas.
to seek ways to bridge science, business, policy, and the arts.
Together, let's enter this space in the spirit of poetic possibilities.
Nous venons tous de diverses cités, et c'est cela vraiment notre diversité, la force formidable de notre continent. Et pourtant, nous marchons encore sur des routes fragiles. Comment construire notre Afrique avec ce terme malhabile, cette allure galvaudée loin des initiatives qui pourraient de nos villes faire une place active? Et que dire? Que dire à présent de notre gestion, de l'eau que l'on gaspille parfois sans concession, des ordures recyclables mais jamais recyclées, de ces paysages admirables mais bien souvent trop gâchés? L'histoire rappelle que c'est l'Afrique qui nous rassemble et que pour la construire, il faut agir ensemble. Moi, je veux une révolution de nos villes. Je les veux plus vertes et je veux de l'accueil des cités merveilleuses. Et puis, bon pied, bon œil, au gré de leurs histoires sur les pas d'une histoire. Car nos villes, c'est l'aventure. Nos villes sont nos miroirs. Pour l'urbanisme intelligent, nos villes nous appellent et nous interpellent pour l'action maintenant.
Hello, everybody.
Just getting our sound right in the office. My name's Paul. I look after the urban systems team at ICLEI Africa, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this evening session to debrief about the Rise Africa Action Festival Day 1, which was on the theme, The Cities We Want. I'm joined with a number of colleagues in our room here, and we're just going to have a really nice informal conversation about what were the themes that came out today, and any chief impressions that we'd like to share. So I see colleague Fumi has just turned on video, and Sungu, who had a intervention in our first session. Could I also invite Nazreen and Nosive to join us? Nazreen was in our morning session as well on storytelling and just transitions, and Nosive presented a fabulous lunchtime lecture on the work that they're doing with DAG on informal development and housing, addressing the housing crisis in Cape Town in South Africa. So I think it would be nice to start with the three people who joined us live in the sessions, or two people who joined us live in the sessions, and just say what were your impressions from the conversation today. And then I have some questions, but I know we've got a few questions around the input. So maybe for me, if we could start with you, what struck you in the conversations today as a highlight that you'd like to share with the room? And then we can hear from Nazreen.
Thank you very much, Paul. And hello, everyone with us on this evening debrief, particularly this being the first day of the festival. Like in our introductory video, we had invited you into this space with understanding, with coming in with joy, and coming in with a spirit to partake. I think that was one element we could feel, where people were excited, first of all, to join the festival, but beyond being excited, also having a proper reflection, understanding. It was this tension from the first session. One could feel the tension between grappling with the cities that we currently have. And as we all know, they are very far from perfect. The challenges are there, the challenges are evident, but also not being caught up in this tales of woe, and understanding on the other side of the current cities we sit with is the potential to be able to transform those cities. I liked Lusungu's initial intervention, which helped us to to contextualize properly what are the challenges that we sit with, ranging from climate problems to problems of a financial deficit to problems around how people navigate. Okay.
I've spotlighted you so you can see.
Thank you. To understanding who are the people in the cities. But I think that one thing that came through also was looking at cities. If I mute myself.
Hold on, we've been doing this for a while, but we still got some nice technical glitches. Give us a sec. Everyone's sound should be off. And then use your sound and mic. Difficulty is if me speaks through my computer.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you. But also understanding that cities are not made up of the infrastructure, but of the people. And I think Matthew Blaze brought that on board very clearly. And prompting questions such as, how do the people within the city navigate the city, and who makes up the city? And if people make up the city, then how do we account for their agency within the city? But something that Nazreen prompted us to think about, and which I found very useful in that session, was around how we communicate with the people. We're so used, particularly those of us who work within this context, there's a certain way we communicate, and I found that to be more of a challenge around you're used to this method of communication. It's almost like speaking to each other in our echo chambers, but do people understand when we say what is the need for renewable energy, and why do we need to move from where we currently are to move to where we need to be, and challenging us to think a little bit differently in how we communicate that. But I think I will just wrap up, because my entry is supposed to be very brief, with another session which we had, the food session, and my take home there from Tolua's intervention, Tolua Oni, her intervention, and it tied together everything that had been said in the morning session, was this prompt around what is the cost of inaction. We all understand that the cities we currently sit with are not the cities we want to be in. And there is
probably space. But then there's also this despondency that comes with, oh no, we've tried what we know to do. We've tried, and I don't think things are going to be, I don't think there's the political will. But benchmarking that against what the actual cost of inaction and choosing to not be very deliberate about the actions we're taking, whether we think about it in the way we navigate the food systems, or we think about it from a climate perspective and from a biodiversity loss perspective, or whether we think about it even to people being able to navigate the cities and being able to fully actualize themselves within our cities. What is the cost of inaction? Oh.
So I might direct that one to Nazreen and pass the buck. I think Fumi's raised some really great points from the early session. Maybe if you want to add, to that, what struck you from today's sessions, and then that refrain. What is, can we afford not to act?
We definitely can't afford to not act. Definitely not, because we're already running out of the golden time to act. And I guess some of the things that I would say about Oni's inputs, Fumi has already said that, but I felt like, I listened to her speak and I felt, wow, she's coming on very strongly. And some of the words, I'm like, oh my God, this is like very strongly. And like so much ambitious thinking and so much ambitious plan around, planetary health and how we can be able to just incorporate, climate solutions into urban spaces, but also if there is any need for a Marshall Plan for planetary health, and also how that kind of intersects with other, socioeconomic issues like, the global health crisis we are still experiencing, food security, access to basic resources, clean water, energy, and stuff like that. So I felt like she kind of rounded up very nicely in a way that makes you feel like, okay, this is a very serious crisis and we need to act. But I feel like for me personally, what resonated with me was actually this session that I joined, the lunchtime lectures about housing, because I feel like people in our age bracket, I don't want to say my age bracket, but I just feel like it's very tough. It's just really tough for people within our age bracket trying to get out of the zone of, oh, you want to just get something for yourself, let's say housing. It's extremely tough because one, the economy is not really good to us, but then there are all these social and political structures. But then you also look at the income. Does the income avails you the resources and opportunity to be able to do that? And there were already issues around whether it's affordability, accessibility, and it also touches on state roles such as slowness or bureaucracy when you're looking for your plans to be approved, and also concerns surrounding building standards and safety. But it also remains that there is rapid urbanization, but this rapid urbanization is actually not for lower or middle class individuals. It's actually for people that have lots of money. It's for the real estate developers who build up these urban infrastructures or plans so that they can keep making money. And this really ties very strongly into a discussion I had last week in Nairobi. And there is this issue about rapid urbanization currently happening in Egypt, where they have new cities, bundles of new cities that are really empty, right? Sky high buildings, hundreds, thousands of units, but they're empty because people that own those buildings already or houses already have 3 or 4 other houses. And those houses are not affordable for lower or middle income individuals. So I just feel like this really resonates with people that are really trying to, make comfortable living, but are unable to. So, but, I also like the idea that he highlighted the work that DAG is doing around community-led mobilization to find housing solution and also testing affordable housing, because we touch so much around rapid urbanization and around all this new building and sustainable, building materials, but all these things are really, really expensive and all these things cost a lot. So, but affordable housing should also be perhaps part of the agenda because people cannot be homeless. So I just feel like actually this is an issue affecting so many people, but then also something that is somewhat sitting in the gray area in terms of looking at all the crises around urbanization and development and stuff like that. And I just felt like it's personally resonated with me, and I believe with so many other people. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. You've touched on a few points there. I just want to specify a little bit the rapid urbanization. I think you've touched on something which is a great segue into what Lusungu was talking about in terms of 60% of the built environment in African cities yet to be laid. And I think what you've noted is there's rapid urbanization that you're seeing in terms of built environment. We seem to be building a lot, and who are we building for? But we have to distinguish as well. Rapid urbanization is also happening for a set of vulnerable people who don't have housing, who are being born into cities, who are finding themselves in growing households, and then household numbers are going down, so we need more housing stock for them. And of course, then the traditional argument about people coming and seeking opportunities. But about 60% of urban growth is happening from people being born in cities now. Cities, the urbanization trend is now reinforcing itself. It's not just people coming. So I think that's a really nice point about the built environment and who is that for, who are we building it for, versus the rapid urbanization as this trend. So Lusungu, I want to hand to you for sort of impressions from what you've heard so far, but also we've been using this statistic of 60% of the built environment yet to be laid. And of course, we're talking generational work. We're talking over the next 50 to 60 years. But how are we tracking that? I think you added some ideas into the talk this morning about specific levers to do so. But I feel like, is it just that this conversation takes a while to get there? Are we going to see this come down? Okay, good. Now we've got 58% of our built environment to build, or are we just dealing with a massive rapid urbanization trend that we're not going to be able to overcome? I threw too many questions at you at once. I'm sorry.
That's a lot of questions. I'll see what I can answer. Thank you. And it's actually a really nice segue into some of my takeaways that I saw from the couple of sessions I was able to tune into this morning. On my side, it's early. I think that, rapid urbanization is happening, and I absolutely agree, Paul. The people, whether they are in the top 1% or the bottom, 60% are still going to be there. And so what decisions are we going to be making about the quality of life we want to see in the cities, the housing choices we're going to see? And I think something that really struck me this morning was the emphasis on knowledge, on co-production of knowledge, and also just sort of the continued hints at participatory action. And I think that came through in the lunchtime lecture series that I listened to around the housing discussions, and especially around waste management. And so I think what is going to be the defining or the challenge we have, what will make a difference in the next 50 years is how we make these conversations more participatory and bring in this diverse set of stakeholders. I think that really is important. I think that urban policies in the region have been sort of made from a technocratic place. And I think the shift now, and I think there is a pleasant shift and a paradigm shift happening within policymaking, within the international development space as well, that is acknowledging the actors. I think in the video we saw, it's about amplifying sort of the solutions that are already happening on the ground. And I think these are the marginalized voices, and this is who is making up the majority of the cities. I think this is where we need to look to ensure that we're not just building for the rich and for the 1%, but the people who are most impacted are coming to the table. For instance, like I really enjoyed the presentation from our colleague from DEG, from the Development Action Group. I think that's the name of the organization. and sort of these abilities to bring academic and private sort of together, like with the academic institution that's working on thinking about policy. And I think bringing urban planning academics, on the ground with community organizations, with people who are working directly with affected communities that are needing housing is the way to go. Coming up with solutions that are co-created and address the real challenges, not just, what they think are the challenges. And I think, in the conversation, there's a lot of talk about we have to involve, for instance, the informal sector from the beginning. I'd say even a step before that, we have to involve communities in even identifying what the problems are, and then coming up to design what the intervention should be, and then involving in the implementation. There was someone who had said, we have the policies, we have the urban planning policies, but they're not being implemented. And I can't agree with that more. And I think that implementation will be more successful, and we will see our cities being more sustainable, and we will see our cities achieving sort of the goals we have aspired to if we ensure that it is a participatory process from the beginning. So I think there's a lot of hope. I know I may have sounded a little bit heavy to begin with in my speech, but I hope that the hope and the opportunities that we have in our hands is something that we can take and do things differently, be an example for the rest of the world. I think this is kind of that delicate, fragile shift we're at this moment. I hope I answered some of your questions, Paul.
Thanks. I mean, always more questions, isn't it? But no, I think what you've also contextualized there is something that emerged from the early conversation around this formal policy, formal plans, and then informal processes. And I think that's a tension that we're grappling with a lot in this forum. Is do the structural approaches that we've got in our institutions match what's going on in the real world? And when is it appropriate that the structure changes or upsets that real world process, and when is it inappropriate? And Vanessa Pillay from WeGo gave some really great insights into what you've spoken about, which is planning from the beginning with informal traders, and actually some really great, in a way, sort of advocacy and organizing to hold the hands of a number of local governments in the process of getting them into the participatory approach. And I think there was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek example from Liberia, in which the informal workers organization sort of said, well, the city officials aren't very good negotiators, so we're going to do capacity building with them collectively to improve our negotiating skills. And I think that's really interesting, sort of this hand-in-hand journey. So I think, Nasiba, this touches quite a lot, I think, on the work that you're engaged. And I asked Vanessa a bit about if those examples and that work is helping to shift that narrative about the planned versus the unplanned. And I think in your work to engage and support people to understand that informal development is legitimate, I think we're certainly using those terms and trying to push those points. But do you see that shifting, and how are you working towards that shift? You're not coming through on our side? No? Not coming through at the moment. I don't know if there's a mute button on your computer. Sometimes that one changes things, or maybe the headphones. Okay. Let's take a pause and come back and just let us know when the sound, or when you want to try the sound again. So that question on changing narratives, and I should indicate that if you've joined us in this conversation, feel free to also raise a hand if you want to ask a question or throw something in the chat to add. I think we're going to just talk loosely for a while and see what emerges. But I don't know if there's a reaction from colleagues in the room, or for me, you have a reflection on some of that. My perception. Go ahead. Oh, I see receivers.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think there was a problem with my PC, so luckily my colleague was next to me. So yeah, I do appreciate firstly the reflections from during the day, because I missed some of the sessions because we also had our co-production workshop during the day with the backyarders. So yes, I agree with you. I think through this implementation of this program at DEC, we do realize that there is that mismatch between what the planning policies having been intending or they've assumed the cities will be like and what is actually happening on the ground. So there's a huge gap. And also just to reflect on the micro or maybe the small scale rental sector that I reflected on earlier. So they are happening in the already established townships with already existing regulatory from town planning. There are already existing zoning, which do not align or maybe do not permit what is already happening. So they've been zoned maybe for single residential or second dwellings, but now we see people building at scale and the existing policy does not enable that to happen. And what we see now people are doing, they are doing what is not within what is permitted in the area. And then as DAG, we try to take these learnings or maybe these policy gaps and try to lobby with the municipalities and see if there can be any incentives, because what the developers are doing, they are providing or they are responding to the housing needs. So far with our work and trying to lobby with the municipality to look at the regulatory reforms and where they can change in order to accommodate what is happening, because it's not going our way. People are building with the right zoning or without the right zoning, building plans or without building plans. So maybe one thing that I think we've learned as an organization is that yes, people, one, they don't have right access to the information, especially the developers. They don't understand the zoning regulations. And maybe they'll appoint an architect, and maybe the architect will mislead the developer, or they'll just try to find a quick way of having the building plans approved. So that's one thing we noticed, that people now are trying to find ways to work outside of what is existing within the policy. But as DEC, we are saying, okay, this is happening and is continuing to happening, and there are some other unintended consequences, such as the building structures and also the overcrowding and also the impact on the existing infrastructure. So ours is to say, to the municipalities, are there any incentives that can be crafted in order to support, to legalize or formalize the people that are building, and also to also find some programs within the municipalities to support them in terms of infrastructure improvement, and also having maybe housing support centers or local planning offices that are going to be responsible for training and supporting this sector. So yes, I do agree with you. There is that huge mismatch between the policy, especially the planning policy, and what people are doing on the ground. But we as an NGO, we are trying to fill that gap. And we've already seen some results in the city of Cape Town. There's already a dedicated program within the municipality where they're saying, we see this is happening and we want to respond. And we as DEC, we bring the community into those tables that we can find the right solutions for everyone. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, and I'm so sorry for the earlier.
Thanks. I suppose, to me, what that sounds like is that there is a shift in culture to embrace, this what is happening, and say, look, instead of, I mean, as mentioned earlier, there's tons of fantasy cities being built or entire cities being built up front, which is kind of a counterpoint to what's going on with organic growth and what's actually emerging in the cities. So it sounds to me like there's this sort of cultural shift to say, okay, let's actually get our hands dirty with what's here and not ignore it or criminalize it. Umi, do you have some reflections?
On my own. Okay, thank you very much, Paul. And yes, I agree wholeheartedly with what Nosive put on the table, but just also to say that something that seemed to be coming through for me from most of the sessions today is the fact that there's a gradual shift, and I think, Paul, you've alluded to that, from criminalizing or continuing to regard the informal sector as informal, so to speak. There's a legitimacy that we need to begin to think, and this starts from governance structures. I think it's happening organically on the ground, especially with those who work at community level, that needs to be given to many informal structures, many informal movements, and also circling back to Vanessa Pile's talk today also on informality and on how that needs to not be criminalized and what is happening on the ground to be able to scale up many of that. But for me, I think largely is also thinking around how we think of addressing the current cities that we have. And the fact that at the core of cities are people. And yes, I know as a people-centered development expert, I always circle to people, but at the end of the day, the people make up the cities. And through whatever lenses we look at it, there's a need to consciously, from local government up through the different levels of government and whatever portions we play and however we intersect the space, to always rethink how our solutions come through. We've seen from many of the examples that were given in the sessions today that the solutions which seemed to have resonated most and which seems to have brought on board the most responses are solutions which were organic, solutions which were ground up, as against top-down approaches. And what that says to us is that within the structure of how our cities are currently formed across Africa, the response or the answer to moving from the cities that we have into the cities that we want or the cities that we believe that we deserve doesn't lie with the quote unquote government, it lies with the people. It lies with people being able to say, this works for us, this doesn't work for us. It lies with people being able to adequately communicate to people on what are certain problems, but beyond the problems, also what are responses. I remember also today we had a very great session on fostering psychological well-being in cities, and I thought that was a fantastic session. And one thing that came through there was this idea around mental health and mental well-being within African cities and the stigma around mental well-being and how to begin to address that stigma. And going back to the grassroots, going back to where within the communities people find legitimacy in terms of whether traditional healers or you're talking about religious heads, and using those forums rather to address much of the stigma that comes through from mental health well-being. So at the center of it is that whatever solutions we're proposing on the table, how are the solutions coming about? Are these perceived solutions where we think this is what is best for the people, which we've seen through the different examples from today don't work? Or are we allowing these solutions to emerge from a process of dialogue with quite a multiplicity of stakeholders? And not only the stakeholders that we traditionally want to hear, but also those stakeholders whose voices are usually missing in the conversation.
I had a moment in that session as well, which which was a familiar one, which is overwhelm, which is I think similar to for me sort of talk about a shift in how we're viewing this sort of informal planned unplanned paradigm. Mental health has become a bigger consideration. Intersectionality has become a bigger consideration. And this is really exciting because we're moving away from these stuck, siloed boxes. But there hasn't yet emerged a clearer sense of, well, how do you navigate that? And to be sort of simple about it, whose job is it to do that navigation and to do that coordination? And I was really excited to be in the session where we were talking about sort of determinants of mental health and some of the projects, but I also felt the overwhelm of, oh my goodness, we're going to add mental health to the planner's docket, you know, as another thing that has to be addressed in addition to food and water and waste management. And so, you know, I wonder, you know, Naz and Sungu and Nasiba, you know, to go around, have you, you know, in what you've reflected on, are there models, and here's a governance voice, it's process work, you know, are there models that have excited you where you've seen that shift? I mean, if we're talking about breaking silos and more collaboration, more partnership, how do we coordinate that? Have you seen interesting examples of that in your work?
Well, just thank you for that. Just to reflect, you know, I was thinking about the word access. I think Nasiba was talking about access to information that that communities are having, which is helping them it's empowering them and then bringing them into the dialogues and the conversations. In the discussion this morning, I think it was one of the ones around the waste pickers, and my other hat, I'm also doing some doctoral research around the role of the informal sector and in defining circular economy policy in the region, in Africa, in African cities. And the word around access comes up a lot, you know, access to materials, to waste materials, access to infrastructure where waste pickers can have space to transform those materials into more valuable products. Even access to collecting the materials, you know, having a livelihood. So I think that in terms of, and as we think about policy, you know, policies can have negative impacts and positive impacts. And I think we're at a point where circular economy is becoming really a buzzword, and it's important that the policies that are coming out of something like circular economy, for instance, are done in a way that is integrating the experience of those who are already recovering resources. And I come back to this point again of like that inclusive sort of policy making or inclusive processes. And I think that in terms of interesting examples, I think this is happening in Latin America. I think we're starting to see a lot more of waste pickers there having that agency to represent themselves and gain rights. And I think there's been partnerships. I think partnerships is important, partnerships between academic partners in Latin America connecting with waste picker organizations who are at a certain level of organization. And I think this varies throughout the continent, throughout the African continent, how organized waste pickers have been able to be in terms of cooperatives and associations, and be able to collectively advocate for rights and for access, for this access to the city, access to this livelihood that they have been, you know, supporting them for ages. And I think we have to be careful as we do design policies that they are recognizing what's already happening on the ground and who's already being involved. So I think that partnerships in terms of like the best examples I've seen, even like in Nasiba's case, I think the partnership when you see two stakeholders that have traditionally been working separately coming together and then having a community representative there to design what the response will be is really where I always see sort of some success. And I think those need to be scaled up, those sort of partnerships, and we need those at the local level, at the national level. There needs to be some continuity on how those partnerships are in place so that the community is really represented. And I'm a firm believer in that the policies really do need to be there. And then of course, enforcement and implementation are something that comes along as well. But you know, the most exemplary options I've seen have been through partnerships.
Yeah, I agree with that. Partnership, yes. But then in our experiences as an organization, we are, I think I did allude it earlier in my presentation that the relationship between the community and the government, because people have been waiting for answers, for solutions. and people are frustrated and do not trust the government. So in that sect, or if the government want to intervene in such a space where there's no social trust between the government and that's where actually I think that maybe the NGO sector, people who are already working on the ground, who have built those relationships and trust with the community, can play that intermediary role between the government and the people or the community in the ground. And I think as the Development Action Group, we've been playing that role. And I also just like to adopt or maybe employ an example from our program as well on the work that we're doing with the small scale rental sector. So the City of Cape Town did, I think in 2021, where they gazetted a policy or maybe a policy proposition to say that, yes, we are recognizing the people are building and they've been building without the support or without submitting the building plans, but now we want to intervene in terms of maybe putting in place some incentives on how they can be supported. And obviously, the city also understands that there's that gap, because when they come to these unregulated spaces, people end up being punished or criminalized for not complying with the planning policies. So as DEG, we really took that opportunity as the organization to say that, okay, we're going to play that sector coordination role, where we conducted a research using what was proposed or the incentives that were proposed by the City of Cape Town, and see how these can be implemented and who needs to be consulted and engaged with in order for the City of Cape Town to effectively support the small scale rental. So in 2020, 2021, we conducted a research where it actually nicely details how then that can be put into implementation and which sector or stakeholders need to be engaged in. And we're seeing some good fruits. Recently, the City of Cape Town, and just to speaking on the issue of mental health, because when we see, or if you can go to these places, some of them, they are overcrowded, and that speaks on the unsustainable livelihoods or neighborhoods. And then now the City of Cape Town is saying, how can we try to use our planning or urban design guidelines to promote sustainable way of building or sustainable development of our neighborhood? Because we've seen people doing it themselves, and at some point there was no some sort of thinking beyond what you're building on your site. When you're looking at the neighborhood scale, people, it kind of gets scary because of the overcrowding or the density. Yes, we want the densities, but then how can we balance between the densities and also a sustainability of the neighborhood? Because we're speaking of the bulk infrastructure and other important facilities like the community parks, social amenities. So now the city is starting to speak on those things and saying we want to capacitate the people to use these tools of thinking sustainably, but then now there's that gap. We don't trust, or the community doesn't trust the city or the municipalities. And that's where we've as DEC, we've played the role of a stakeholder manager or stakeholder engagement organization, where we put all these people into one room and see what can we do, what needs to be put in which place in order for this thing to be achieved. So I really I agree with Lusungi, who was saying earlier on, partnership is very key, and also recognizing the power of each or influence of each stakeholder, because currently the relationships between their community and the government, they are not very good. But what other stakeholders within the system, especially the community-based organization and the NGOs, what role can they play? Because already they are on the ground working with the people. So bringing everyone on board and recognizing as well the influence of each and every stakeholder in bringing together or trying to create that platform of co-creation and co-production, as we often refer to these processes. So it is possible. We just need maybe a recognition of what role each stakeholder is going to play, and also recognizing what is already missing, that trust and social compact, if they may say, that they're trying to bring back between the government and the community. So yeah, that's what we currently at or playing as a role, we as Development Action Group, as a sector coordinator. It's not an easy job, because you're asking earlier, oh, whose job is it? It's supposed to be lying in town planners. Where is it? Whose job is it? It's everybody's job to recognize and identify people that they can work with and can partner with in order to achieve the desired outcomes, which is sustainable cities Yeah.
I thought you were leading somewhere else with it. Whose job is it? We're doing it. It's our job. It's like, oh, thank you.
It's
Yeah.
everybody's job.
But no, I mean, I think the point of the intermediary, you know, and having those champions who are doing that bridging work, I think is really valuable. Naz, and then for me has a point she wants to jump on.
Yeah. So I guess, honestly, I feel like a lot has been said already, but in terms of, breaking down the box of silos, and I've heard lots of things around collaboration and partnerships, and this really points out how building synergies is extremely important, whether it's at a sectoral level or it's as a resource level, regional or governance level, extremely important. And take, for instance, when you're looking at addressing issues around adaptation and resilience, definitely climate finance would be involved, and then you would have to think around, where does loss and damage stand in all this? And I get that it's the buzz thing now. And then you also have to look at, we have to think about cutting off public financing of fossil fuel, and then where do we place diplomacy and policy? So then you find out that as long as you're looking at it not from one single issue-based approach, but from a broader picture of how do we address intersected issue, you'll be able to see that there are lots of elements that can be incorporated, and also lots of elements that can be addressed. So which is why sometimes, or I think recently, there are lots of emphasis on movement building in terms of how do we align, how do we collaborate to address issues of shared interest? How do we mobilize, bring together resources to address one single issue as one, as opposed to just working in silos when these issues are very similar. And this also goes to kind of highlight, or emphasize why, besides also looking at things from issue-based or in terms of how do we coordinate movement, maybe at a regional level in Southern Africa or within national lines, but also looking at how do we coordinate or collaborate amongst ourselves from, let's say, West Africa to Southern Africa. Because one thing I also realize is that there are strengths in terms of which region has more, whether in terms of capacity or resource. And take, for instance, climate litigation or issues around legal perspective when it comes to climate change. You find out that in South Africa specifically, there is lots of expertise in that, and there are also lots of recorded wins as regards to that. So if there is an issue around that in West Africa, it makes it much easier to collaborate and coordinate resources, because then you're dealing with people that have the know-how and people that already have that experience. So it also speaks to how do we go beyond regional and national lines to synergize to address this issue. And one kind of assumption I've also been testing in terms of collaboration and partnership is also going across boards to the global majority, as we keep saying, looking at what are the similarities in terms of political and social cultural dynamics between us and, say, the broader Latin America or the broader Asian continents. Because when you look at it, you find out that there are lots of similarities in terms of our social structure, lots of similarities in terms of our political systems. So, but then, especially in Latin America, you find out that the way that their movement are built are extremely coordinated, extremely far-reaching in deriving the results that they want in organizing and advocating and in campaigning. So I always look at that is a strength that we can adopt by co-creating, by co-conceptualization of ideas, by convening. And it's really just about reaching out to say, we would love to coordinate, we would love to organize, we would love to co-convene. And we've tested that and it has worked. So it's really also about looking at what is it from across the continent, because sometimes I feel like we really encircle ourselves within the continent by saying we are only for Africa. And, I really started testing this assumption that, especially with subjects, that we need to go beyond the continent. And the first thing we did was, we reached out to entities that coordinate within the Amazonia, and we said, where we host these regional workshops across regions within Africa, but we're thinking about hosting something within the Amazonia, and it's working perfectly well, trying to just discern different kinds of thinking around how do we mobilize And how do we engage? And how do we bring this thing that has worked so well for us in Africa to Latin America? Because we understand that there are issues of capitalism, neocolonialism, racism, which we also experience, but how do we build movement and, you know, collaborative, immersive media experiences around that? So it works if you test these assumptions across different regional lines, but also looking at it from how do you tailor these approaches? Because definitely what works in Nigeria might not necessarily work in Brazil, but there are points of alignments to be shared. It's also looking at it from, you know, different sectoral perspective at, let's say, city levels that we've been talking about, in terms of, we talk about sustainabilities in urban development and urban systems, but where does the environment stand in all of that? How do we place issues of water and food justice? Should we be concerned about human security? Should we be concerned about climate security? And also, how do we advocate or place issues of also public health, because these are really serious issues at a very local and community level. So for me, the kind of breaking that box of silos is extremely important, because what it brings for us is boundless opportunities of ways to rethink or reimagine our own systems, our own structures, whether it is at a community level, at a national level, or even within organizational, you know, boundaries in terms of how we organize and how we develop programs. I don't want to say so much, but really just to say that there is really deep acknowledgement that synergies are extremely important and extremely integral in driving, you know, advocacy and in driving this work forward. And we should definitely keep breaking those boundaries.
Thanks. I think you said so much there, and I just want to touch on one piece, and then I actually want to hand to do a closing round of reflections. And I think a piece of the puzzle that we don't often talk about is the financing and how do we mobilize resources into this work. You know, and it's yet another language that we need to get better at speaking. We're assured every time we go to big meetings that there's so much money around, there's lots of money around, but there are gaps in how we mobilize it and what types of things banks, finance institutions are willing to fund. And it just, you know, it struck me, there are a few conversations that have taken place over the course of this year, and this morning's one sort of struck the chord again, of the types of things that funders want to put their money in tend to be large, shiny, technical. And the types of things that we as urbanists are pushing for are dirty, emotive, lots of work, lots of people-based and process work. So Lusungu, you mentioned waste pickers. We've got colleagues working in Tanzania around a model of waste collection, which is very exciting. But their need is a waste transfer station in every ward, not one massive waste collection site out of the city that will then need a whole logistical system to support. But it's easier for a bank to allocate a nice big pot of money at once to that large project than to, you know, they're absolutely afraid of the amount of work that goes into coordinating and keeping people in a social structural arrangement. So I just wanted to add that as my reflection of the day was, I think, and I don't know where, I can't evidence this, but there's a feeling that we're seeing shifts in the narrative to embrace more of these informal systems, more of these realistic systems and social systems as valid expressions of African cities. There's more work to be done, but I see those types of hurdles, translating that and legitimating that as delivering the services that we need. So I want to go around again. I think for me, then Lusungu, Nusive, Naz, and for me can close this off. Just with a closing reflection on today, the discussion here, and something you'll take forward.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I think is also a prompt for me. You were already leaning into what I wanted to ask. And I hear the discussion around partnerships and leveraging those relationships, and I 100% buy into it. But the other part of it, and some of which Paul has alluded to, is beyond partnership, mobilizing the financial resources on ground, because at the end of the day, that's what truly delivers change. And we can have the best laid out plans without the finances to back it up. It remains as beautifully laid out plans. Now, many practitioners continue to highlight different barriers to actualizing partnerships that delivers on the ground. And I just wanted to ask, and probably this forms part of your closing reflection from you. In your experience, in your practice, what has been some of the strategies that you deployed to overcome those barriers and to actually begin to make those partnerships and those linkages that circle back and truly onboard change at the local level beyond just convening? And there is great essence and necessity in convening and in having these discussions. But when you work with local governments and when you work with cities, they want something tangible, and they ask you, so what do we get out of this after we have the workshops? What is in it for us? And how do you leverage those partnerships to be able to deliver change on the ground for people?
I would like to go first because I really need to step away. So, but for us, we actually at Surge, we really value relationship building. And somehow I really don't know how, but we see people speak about how difficult it is for them to build that base, to build that relationship. But I guess because we've really made it a part of our culture to ensure that we go head on to build that relationship. And in building relationship is in ensuring that there is trust embedded in whatever relationship you're trying to build, and also to show that, it's for us, we really like to be realistic in the sense that this is not going to be a short-term gain. It's going to take a lot of time for this goal to be achieved. A lot of resourcing would go into it, and they would be maybe failures, but we have a goal that we want to achieve. And most of the time in engaging, especially with state governments, not federal, in engaging with state government, what we find out is that they are really mostly keen, because we've done lots of policy advocacies. There are policies right now that have passed the second stage of reading. So I'll get into that. But the thing is that you find out that there is the interest from state level in terms of wanting to push for these policies or wanting to drive this specific agenda. But most of the time it's in resources that you find that, that you find the gap or the struggle. So when we go in, we say that, okay, this is what we are trying to do. This is whether it's the risks, the benefits or so, but we're not only here to do this, we're here to understand why this has not been enacted in the first place, or why you have similar laws that are updated. So it's not like we go in very strong. We try to go in to say that we understand there are limitations, there are issues, but we're here to provide any support that the state might need in this regard. And then, we begin to have these discussions. It's like you have to lay the ground to build a very trustful long-term relationship, but for them to be able to buy into the idea, so much so that they would be the ones reaching out to you to say, when are we going to do this? When are we going to push for this? Because they realize the value of what you are trying to push for the state. So we've done this a lot. And, in this essence, we've done lots of convening with state government at a very state level. We've also done lots of community engagement, but it remains that most of the heavy building in terms of resourcing we provide, because we understand that we're going in to propose this idea, which may necessarily not be on their plate, but they're willing to push for it if you bring in the resources. So it's like, you need to definitely give in a lot. You need to do lots of heavy lifting, and it's also definitely baby steps, because sometimes, there's this specific policy we've tried to push for over 2 years now, and we're only trying to conserve 10% of the state landmass, to prevent from illegal logging, to put pathways or frameworks for conservation. So we said, okay, why not a law that conserves 10% of the state? And just as this law passed the second reading, guess what? The election came in, new government, and now we have to start from the beginning, I'm sure of it. So, there are lots of issues around engaging with government, but I feel like you need to learn how to build solid relationship. First, know that you would have to do the heavy lifting in terms of resourcing, mobilizing. You also need to really introduce them and bring to the table things that normally they won't have access to, things that normally they haven't thought of, because you need to also be infusing those new thinking, new ideas, that there are ways to do things differently. And it has worked for us. It really isn't as rosy as it sounds, but it's also really isn't as tough as we hear from others. So it really depends on the government and the influence you're trying to drive. So yeah, I need to.
Thank you, Nazarene. Yes. Can I hand to Nosive and then to round off Lusungu?
I have to actually run. Nosive, would you mind if I just one minute? I actually have to go.
1 minute.
And I will be less than a minute, because I think I'll be remiss without having put on my ECA hat during this conversation in advocating for the voluntary local review process, which I think a really instrumental and useful way to bring all these partners and stakeholders together. We have a tool, and many African cities have taken on this tool. I know in South Africa, a number of cities, or Cape Town is an example. And I think through tools like this, then we can really start to have these conversations and consolidate these ideas, these diverse opinions into one place, and then use this as we go to funders and we go, to find resources to make some of these interventions come to life. So it's a way not only just to align with these global goals, but it's a way for cities to come together, break down those silos, and jointly plan what kind of cities and local governments they would like to see. So ECA is supporting a number of local authorities in the region, and I will be joining ECA in July. I'm on my way there. So if anyone's on the call, or a call for anyone who would like support from ECA, we've developed guidelines on producing the voluntary local review. That is something that I'm putting out there, and would love to partner and give that capacity where it's needed. So with that, I'm sorry, I have to run. And it was a pleasure joining everyone on this conversation today. And I look forward to the next couple of days of the festival. Thank you, Paul.
It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. And thank you for making that link back to, more global processes. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Fumi.
Yeah. Nosive?
Take care.
Thank you so much. I kind of lost my thoughts along the way, but I think just going back to what I was talking about the importance of having a social compact between the community and the state, because that is what is lost at the moment. And of course, while that partnership is formed between the citizens and the state, then they can come together to mobilize resources together. But most importantly, in this sector that I'm talking about, because we talk about people building the cities. So that means they'll need to have access to resources. And currently what is missing in the small scale rental sector is the access to affordable finance to build these at scale. Because what is currently available, the traditional banks, the big banks in our country, they are actually very skeptical investing in this sector because it's risky, as it's not regulated, and those policies do not speak. There are no current policies supporting the sector. So it's very risky in terms of investment from the private sector. But there are other players, small microfinanciers, but we are calling for more diverse so people can have choice to access affordable finance mechanism. But very importantly, is just that social impact for citizens and the state to work together, find solutions together, and also mobilize resources together.
Thank you very much. And if I can summarize the three main points emerging out of this, especially with regards to building partnership, is embedding trust in the process and giving the process time to mature, but also understanding the role where that social compact plays between citizens on the one side and communities, as well as government and other non-state actors, but also linking that up to more global processes and locating that discourse within something that is over and beyond just what's happening at the local level. On this note, I would like to say a very, very big thank you. Thank you, Nasive. Thank you, Lusinge. And thank you very much to Nazreen in absentia. To everyone who has been on this call up until now. We know that it's pretty late in Cape Town. It's about 7 p.m. now, 7:05 p.m. Thank you very much for your time with us. We look forward to you joining us for tomorrow's session. You'll see in the chat we've popped in the link for you to register. We hope you will be able to join us at our morning sessions and other sessions for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. We look forward to hosting you, and we look forward to the evening debrief again tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, and good night.